You did not become unreachable because you changed. You became unreachable because your nervous system finally stopped cooperating with a role that was slowly killing you. And if that sentence unsettles you, it is because you have been trained through love, through duty, through family loyalty to interpret your own survival response as betrayal. In the middle of life, the psyche stops negotiating. It stops trying to be admired. It stops trying to be good. It begins demanding truth, and the body, often ahead of the mind, begins to close the door. You call it withdrawal, they call it coldness, they call it distance. But what is actually happening is older and more precise. Your system is exiting a power structure. Here is the pattern: useful role addiction. And here is the mechanism: you were kept reachable through guilt, guilt disguised as love, duty, spirituality, loyalty, and being the bigger person. And the moment your nervous system began to understand the hidden contract, it started refusing access. What you called love or loyalty was actually a survival strategy, an emotional economy where you paid with attention, explanation, care, repair, softness, and endless patience, while others stayed powerful by staying entitled. This is not poetry, this is mechanics. Most empaths do not collapse because they care too much. They collapse because they are assigned to carry the emotional cost of the entire system, not through explicit commands, but through invisible roles installed, early roles that made you valuable only as long as you were available. And this is why your unreachability feels so fated, because it is not a decision, it is a rupture of a complex. I want you to notice what you have been calling becoming unreachable. It usually begins as small symptoms, not grand declarations. You forget to reply. Your chest tightens when your phone vibrates. You postpone calls you used to take instantly. You feel irritation at ordinary requests. You stop explaining. You start wanting silence as if silence were oxygen. You disappear socially not because you hate people, but because your body cannot tolerate the transaction anymore. You tell yourself you are burnt out, and that may be true, but it is incomplete. Burnout implies too much work. What you are suffering from is too much emotional servitude. The adult empath in midlife is often haunted by a particular pain, not the pain of being unloved, but the pain of being used while being praised for it. You were told you were strong. You were told you were mature. You were told you were the responsible one. And this praise, this halo, was the most elegant form of imprisonment because it gave you an identity that required sacrifice to remain legitimate. In Jung's language, we would say a persona formed around goodness, competence, calmness, and reliability. But behind that persona, a shadow grew, not evil, not cruel, but furious. Furious at the theft of your life. And because that fury did not fit your identity, you repressed it, you converted it into more caregiving, more patience, more understanding, more let me see their perspective. You tried to metabolize injustice into empathy, but the psyche keeps accounts and the body keeps receipts. Midlife is when the bill arrives. This is why the title carries such weight. Your nervous system was choosing survival. That is not a metaphor. The sympathetic and parasympathetic systems begin to revolt against relational environments that require constant fawning, appeasement, over-functioning, and self-erasure. You may not name it that way, but your nervous system names it perfectly. Danger. The older you get, the less your body believes the old lies. And one of the deepest lies in the empath's world is this: if I do not keep the peace, I will be abandoned and fought. That is the hidden father wound and mother wound speaking through the adult. Let us be blunt. When you were young, love was not free. It was conditional. It was tied to performance. It was tied to usefulness. It was tied to managing other people's emotions. Perhaps you had a mother who was overwhelmed, fragile, unpredictable, or silently resentful. You learned to monitor moods. You learned to prevent explosions. You learned to become the soft cushion in the room. Or perhaps you had a father who was absent, critical, emotionally distant, or psychologically towering. You learned to earn approval by being impressive, helpful, obedient, and invisible at the same time. These are not stories, these are installations. From such conditions, a particular complex forms. The loyalty complex. Emotional loyalty becomes your moral identity. It feels noble, but underneath it is fear, and the fear is not irrational. As a child, you depended on the system, so your psyche developed an exquisite skill. Become indispensable, and you will not be discarded. That is useful role addiction. It is the addiction to earning belonging by being needed. It looks like love. It sounds like virtue. It is often praised by culture and religion, but psychologically, it is a bondage pattern. Now, in adult life, this pattern binds you to structures that resemble the original family system. This is why so many empaths marry into dynamics where their partner is subtly entitled, or emotionally avoidant, or chronically dissatisfied, not because you want pain, because the complex seeks familiarity. The psyche repeats what it has not made conscious. And when you begin to pull away, when your nervous system chooses survival, the entire structure reacts as if you have committed a crime, because you have committed treason against the old contract. Let us name that contract. It is a shame contract. The shame contract says, if I am not available, I am selfish. If I do not fix, I am cruel. If I do not respond, I am disrespectful. If I choose myself, I am ungrateful. For this contract is rarely spoken aloud. It is enforced through microsignals, sighs, disappointment, coldness, and direct commands. Guilt-laced compliments, the sudden silence that punishes you, the "I guess I'll do it myself" martyr statement, the accusation that you've changed, the implication that you've become arrogant, the subtle twisting of the narrative until your boundary becomes their wound. Here is the mechanism: emotional debt economy. In the emotional debt economy, you are made to feel you owe access because they once gave you love, or because they raised you, or because they supported you financially, or because they stood by you, or because they forgave you, or because they put up with you. But what is really being demanded is not gratitude, it is obedience. This is where power enters. A power structure is any relationship or system where one side must manage the emotional reality for both. The empath typically manages the mood, the repair, the meaning making, the apology, the reconciliation, and even the narrative of what happened. This is why you feel exhausted after conversations that are fine in Ezotine, because you are not just talking, you are regulating the room. And in narcissistic dynamics, let us use the word carefully as you requested. One side gains power by outsourcing self-confrontation. They externalize discomfort, they disown weakness, they disown guilt, they disown emptiness, they disown shame, and they induce you to carry it. This is projection, but not only projection in the abstract sense. In real life, you know projection through an immediate bodily feeling, confusion, guilt, defensiveness, and the need to explain yourself to someone who is not interested in understanding. Projection works like this. An unintegrated part of one's psyche is thrown outward and attached to another person. You become the screen. And now the truly sinister evolution, projective identification. Projective identification is not merely they accuse you, it is that they behave in such a way that you begin to feel and act according to the projection. You start performing the role they unconsciously assign you. For example, they feel guilt, but they cannot tolerate it, so they behave with subtle accusation, withdrawal, and moral superiority until you begin to feel guilty. Now they are free, and you are burdened. The system stabilizes. Or they feel weakness and dependency, but they cannot admit it, so they provoke you, demean you, withhold affection until you become anxious, overgiving, desperate to repair. Now they feel strong, and you feel needy. The system stabilizes. Or they fear their own coldness and lack of conscience, so they interpret your boundaries as cruelty, your silence as punishment, your self-respect as arrogance. You begin to question yourself. They remain innocent. The system stabilizes. This is the hidden genius of these dynamics. You end up policing yourself. You become reachable not because they have access to you, but because your guilt makes you unlock the door from the inside. Your nervous system choosing survival is the moment this arrangement fails. The body begins to refuse the projection. It refuses the coerced empathy. It refuses to be the sponge of other people's disowned life. And because the psyche has been trained to equate obedience with love, the refusal feels like death. You feel like you are becoming someone else, but you are not becoming someone else. You are becoming someone you were prevented from becoming. Now we must go further, because the empath's midlife unreachability is not merely fatigue. It is a psychological threshold. This is one of your required symbols, and I will use it precisely, the threshold. A threshold is not a place you live. It is a place you cross. It is the doorway between an identity that kept you safe and a truth that makes you free. It is the moment you can no longer pretend that your caretaking is love when it is actually fear. And on a threshold, the nervous system reacts intensely. Why? Because old survival patterns are dying. That death is terrifying, even when it is necessary. So you interpret your symptoms incorrectly. You say, I am losing my empathy. No, you are losing your compulsive fawning. You say, I am becoming cold, have rending. No, you are becoming unbearable. You say, I don't recognize myself, have very you, correct, because you were trained to recognize only the persona. Persona is the mask adapted to society and family expectation. It is not false, it is functional. But when you identify with it entirely, it becomes a prison. Many empaths' personas are built out of noble traits: kindness, maturity, diplomacy, patience, responsibility, spiritual insight, emotional intelligence. The tragedy is that these qualities can be weaponized against you. The more refined your persona, the easier you are to exploit because you will exploit yourself. You will say, I shouldn't be angry. Alpha, you will say, I should understand. To what? You will say, it's not that bad. I have one fours. You will say, they had a hard life. I made to relish dole. You will say, I don't want conflict. You will say, I don't want to be like them. To might is 1,000, and so you remain reachable, because you remain morality as self-erasure. But your shadow has been waiting. Shadow is not merely aggression. Shadow is everything you were forced to exclude from your identity to remain loved. Selfishness, hunger, pride, refusal, raga, cold, clarity, the capacity to disappoint, the capacity to be misunderstood, the capacity to let someone suffer the consequence of their own behavior. When the empath becomes unreachable, often for the first time, the shadow is not taking over, the shadow is returning your stolen sovereignty. And there will be backlash. This backlash is predictable. Every system reacts when the role holder leaves their role. In the family, the responsible one is punished for being human. In marriage, the caretaker is attacked for needing care. In workplace dynamics, the reliable one is accused of declining standards when they stop over-functioning. Why? Because the system depended on your over-functioning. Let me give you real examples, because abstraction is a luxury you cannot afford. In the family system, you were the emotional translator. You kept the peace between siblings. You mediated your parents. You remembered birthdays, medical appointments, crise. You listened to everyone's grief. When someone acted out, you absorbed it. When someone was selfish, you compensated. When someone was abusive, you rationalized. And you told yourself, that's just family, and the process. But what you called family was actually a labyrinth. This is the second symbol, the labyrinth. A labyrinth is a structure designed to keep you walking without arriving. In such families, the empath is almost getting respect if you just do a little more, if you just explain better, if you just love harder, if you just forgive again, if you just remain calm. The labyrinth makes you exhausted, but also hopeful, because hope becomes the bait. And here is the inversion that breaks the spell. The labyrinth was not built to help you belong, it was built to prevent your exit. In marriage, you may have a partner who doesn't like drama, which means they don't want accountability, or a partner who is always stressed, which means you must carry the emotional climate, or a partner who is charming in public but subtly contemptuous in private, which makes you question your perception, or a partner who becomes fragile the moment you express needs, so you retreat and take care of them again. You become unreachable slowly. It begins when you stop begging for conversation, when you stop trying to prove your intention, when you stop over explaining. Then the accusations come. You're shutting down. You're cold. You don't care. You're punishing me. You're acting like you're better. I find these accusations are not about you. They are the projection of their fear that their control is failing. In workplace dynamics, you were the person who solved problems before anyone noticed them. You were the person who did unpaid emotional labor, smoothing conflict, absorbing tension, being dependable. And when you finally begin to say no, the system interprets it as betrayal. Suddenly you are difficult, uncooperative, not a team player, painful. But what you called teamwork was actually dependency. And dependency is always disguised as praise. Now I will speak directly. If you are an empath in midlife, your unreachability is your initiation. This is why it feels fated. The psyche is forcing an individuation move. Individuation is not self-help. It is not positive thinking. It is the violent, sacred process by which the psyche becomes whole, no longer split into acceptable goodness and forbidden truth, Zait. And individuation has a price. You must disappoint people who benefited from your split. This is why the nervous system chooses survival, because it finally understands, at a level deeper than thought, the old way is not sustainable. Every 600, 900 words, you requested a micro turn. Here it is. Recognition, consequence, inversion. Recognition. You have been reachable because guilt kept you compliant. Consequence. The longer you remain reachable, the more resentment accumulates, and the more the body collapses into anxiety, numbness, chronic fatigue, autoimmune flare, insomnia, compulsive thinking, social withdrawal, inversion. Becoming unreachable is not abandonment. It is the first honest boundary your body has ever set. Now we must speak of shadow exchange. Shadow exchange is when two people unconsciously trade disowned parts. The strong person exchanges their vulnerability. The empath carries it. The selfish person exchanges their conscience. The empath carries it. The cold person exchanges their warmth. The empath supplies it. The irresponsible person exchanges their duty. The empath absorbs it. And you feel special because you can do it. You feel meaningful because you can carry what others cannot. That is the savior complex, though it rarely looks like arrogance. It looks like humility. It looks like devotion. It looks like spiritual love. But psychologically, it is a mechanism to avoid your own life. Here is the hard truth. You were not only trapped by others, you were trapped by the pleasure of being needed. Not pleasure like joy, pleasure like identity. If you stop being needed, who are you? If you stop saving, what is your worth? If you stop fixing, what is your purpose? This is useful role addiction again, now revealed in its deeper layer, and the nervous system choosing survival is the moment the addiction breaks. Addictions do not end gently, they end with disgust, withdrawal, irritability, emptiness, and grief. You grieve not only the people, but the role because the role was your persona, and the persona was your belonging. So, yes, you became unreachable because your body realized that reachability had become the method by which your soul was stolen. In the next part, I will take you deeper into the exact unconscious mechanics, how projection becomes a family shame contract, how projective identification hijacks the empath's nervous system, how father wound and mother wound forge the emotional loyalist, and why the silence you are entering is not emptiness but a locked door that finally protects what was never protected in you. You became unreachable, and the system began to circle you like wolves around a fire that no longer belongs to them. Notice that image. A fire once warmed everyone. They came close without asking. They fed their hands without gratitude. They assumed it was always there. And then one night the fire withdraws into coals. The air turns cold. They look at you with disbelief, as if warmth were a debt you owed. That reaction tells you everything. The empath's unreachability is never interpreted neutrally by those who relied on access. It is interpreted as betrayal, arrogance, punishment, cruelty. And this is your first proof that the relationship was not built on mutuality. It was built on entitlement. Now let us go more precise. Your nervous system is not overreacting. It is reacting accurately to an environment it has mapped as unsafe. The psyche can argue with itself for years, but the nervous system has its own language: tension, nausea, fatigue, shallow breath, numbness, sudden shutdown, dread before contact, relief after silence. The body does not speak in morality, it speaks in danger. In midlife, something changes. You have fewer illusions. Your psyche has less patience for self-betrayal. The second half of life has a brutal honesty because time is no longer an abstraction. The soul begins to ask, quietly but relentlessly, how much of your life will you sacrifice to remain good? This question is not philosophical. It is biological. Your nervous system begins refusing the old emotional economy. Here is the pattern that must be named early and repeatedly because it explains everything. The emotional loyalty loop. Emotional loyalty is not the same as love. Emotional loyalty is a binding mechanism. It is a psychological leash disguised as virtue. It is the belief installed in childhood that to remain connected you must remain compliant, that to be loved you must be useful, that to belong you must absorb what others refuse to hold. Here is the mechanism: emotional hostage taking through guilt and duty. And here is the inversion that breaks the trance. What you called loyalty was actually fear-based obedience. The most dangerous structures do not control you through threats. They control you through meaning, through story, through morality, through a narrative where you are a good person only as long as you remain reachable. Now we enter Jung's real domain, complexes. A complex is not a thought. It is a living cluster of emotion and memory with its own will. It hijacks perception. It produces compulsions. It makes you repeat patterns long after they have stopped serving you. Most empaths do not realize they are living from a complex because the complex sounds like conscience. It says, answer them. It says, don't upset them. It says, be the bigger person. It says, explain again. It says, forgive. It says, prove your intentions. It says, stay soft. It says, don't be selfish. It says, don't be cold. You thought this was morality, but it is the complex maintaining its survival strategy, and the nervous system choosing survival is the moment the complex begins to fail. Why does it fail? Because the cost becomes too high. The psyche can tolerate injustice for years when it believes there will be a reward: love, safety, belonging, approval. But in midlife, the reward does not come. Instead, the empath sees something horrifying. The more you give, the more the system demands. The more you sacrifice, the less you are seen. The more you explain, the more you are misunderstood on purpose. This is why the unreachable phase arrives like destiny, because you finally see the contract. Let us name the third symbol now, because it will organize the mechanics, the contract, not the legal contract, the psychic contract. Every family system, every marriage, every workplace has invisible contracts. They are not spoken, they are enforced through emotion. They determine who is allowed to have needs, who must carry shame, who must be responsible, who must apologize first, who must stay accessible. In many empath structures, the contract is simple. You will be loved for your usefulness and punished for your autonomy. This contract is held together by shame. Shame is not guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. Shame fuses identity with failure, and when shame is installed early, you become easy to govern. You will do anything to avoid being bad. Windfalls. Now understand the political nature of shame. Shame is power. The structure maintains itself by assigning you the moral burden. You become the conscience of the room, and the moment you step back, the structure collapses into chaos because it never developed a real conscience. It outsourced it to you. This is why the backlash is so intense when you become unreachable. Because you were not merely a person, you were a function. Now I will speak sharply. If you were raised in a family where one parent was emotionally immature, unstable, or self-absorbed, you were recruited into a role, and that recruitment is the origin of your nervous system collapse. Let us bring in mother wound and father wound, not as sentimental wounds, but as role mechanisms. The mother wound, in this context, often means the child becomes the regulator of the mother's emotional world. The mother may not be malicious. She may be anxious, overwhelmed, resentful, lonely, or dependent. But the child learns, if I do not perform soothing, she falls apart, and then I am unsafe. So you develop hyper-attunement. You read micro-signals, you anticipate needs, you preempt conflict, you become good. 17. That goodness becomes your persona, and it is built on fear. The father wound here often means love is tied to achievement, obedience, respectability, or silence. The father may be absent or present, but emotionally unavailable. The child learns, if I am impressive, useful, and not a burden, I might be approved of. If I express need, I risk rejection or ridicule. So you develop self-containment, you hide vulnerability, you become strong, you become mature. I will last. And in adult relationships, these wounds combine into a deadly formula. The empath becomes the ideal container. You are both attuned and disciplined. You are both soft and responsible. You are both forgiving and self-denying. In other words, perfect for a structure that wants access without accountability. Now let us go deeper into projection and projective identification with behavioral anchors, not theory. Projection in empath dynamics often arrives as accusation. Someone accuses you of what they are doing, feeling, or refusing to face. But that is too general. I want you to feel the mechanics. A person feels shame. Shame is unbearable. Rather than metabolize it internally, they externalize it by provoking in you what they cannot tolerate in themselves. They create situations where you appear guilty. They interpret neutral acts as betrayal. They twist context. They omit details. They imply moral failure. They talk about how much they sacrificed, ate, and now you feel guilt even if you did nothing wrong. You scramble to repair, you explain, you apologize, you overfunction, you become reachable again. That is power. Projective identification goes further. It is the structural training where you begin to adopt the position they assign you. If they assign you selfish, you overgive. If they assign you cold, you over-emote. If they assign you ungrateful, you overserve. If they assign you cruel, you overjustify. Do you see? Their accusation is not for truth, it is for control. It forces you back into the role. Here is the mechanism: accusation as a leash. This is why you becoming unreachable is revolutionary. When you do not respond to accusation with explanation, the leash fails. When you do not respond to guilt with overfunctioning, the economy collapses. When you do not respond to silence with panic, the structure loses leverage. Now we arrive at another critical feature: silence. Silence is not emptiness in these structures. Silence is currency. One side uses silence to punish, withdraw affection, signal disappointment, create insecurity. The empath is conditioned to interpret silence as danger because in childhood, silence meant rejection, abandonment, or impending rage. So when the structure goes silent, you rush in, you repair, you become reachable. But in midlife something happens. Your nervous system stops buying the silence. You begin to notice their silence is not sadness, it is strategy. Their withdrawal is not pain, it is leverage. Their disappointment is not vulnerability, it is manipulation. This insight is not intellectual. It changes the body, it changes the breath, it changes your tolerance. The nervous system begins to shut down access. Your unreachability, then, is not just distance, it is immunity. Now we must speak of the savior complex and useful role addiction at a deeper level. The internal power structure. Many empaths believe the power structure is out there, the family, the partner, the boss. But Jung would insist the deepest tyranny is internal. The complex inside you that demands you remain good is the inner dictator. Useful role addiction is not only what others want from you, it is the identity you cling to because it protects you from shame. If you are not useful, you fear you are nothing. If you are not needed, you fear you are disposable. If you stop giving, you fear you are selfish. If you disappoint, you fear you will be punished or abandoned. So you continue, even when you hate it, even when you are exhausted, even when your body is sick. This is why the empath's resentment is so poisonous. Resentment is repressed power. It is the shadow screaming behind the persona's smile, and repressed power becomes somatic collapse. In midlife, the body becomes the messenger the psyche can no longer ignore. Panic attacks, migraine, stomach issues, autoimmune symptoms, insomnia, chronic tension, emotional numbness, sudden rage, dissociation. These are not random, they are the body saying, this role is killing us. Now a microturn, recognition, consequence, inversion. Recognition. You were trained to equate reachability with love. Consequence. You became accessible to exploitation. Your life became governed by others' needs. Moods. Crises. Your identity thinned into function. Inversion. Unreachability is not selfishness. It is the first time you are refusing to subsidize other people's immaturity. Now we approach the fourth symbol, the locked door. In the old story, the locked door is cruelty. It is abandonment. It is punishment. In the Jungian story, the locked door is individuation. A locked door is a boundary the psyche erects when consciousness fails to protect the soul. It appears when your internal ethics still demand you sacrifice, but your body refuses. It is the unconscious enforcing survival. This is why you cannot go back even if you try. You try to be reachable again and something in you says no. You feel nausea, irritation, fatigue. You feel you are betraying yourself. That is the locked door. And if you are honest, you will admit you have been trying to unlock it, not because you want the old life, but because guilt still owns part of you. So the real battle is not with other people, it is with guilt. Guilt is the rope that binds the empath to the structure, and guilt is not always moral. Much of empath guilt is synthetic, manufactured, installed. In family systems, guilt is often the enforcement arm of shame. The family teaches, you owe because you were raised, you owe because they struggled, you owe because they did their best, you owe because you're the stable one, you owe because you're the empath. This is why middle life becomes so spiritually violent. You begin to see that you have been paying for love. You have been living in a debt economy where you never signed the contract consciously. But your psyche signed it in childhood under coercion. Now you are tearing it up. In the next movement, we will bring this to its sharpest form. How these structures use attention as currency, how dependency is disguised as love, how family backlash functions as a psychological immune response, and why your withdrawal is the turning of the entire game, because once you stop participating in projection, the projector burns itself out, and there will be one dream vignette, no more than one, because the psyche always reveals truth through image, when the mind is still bargaining. But for now, remain with the core. You became unreachable not because you stopped loving. You became unreachable because your nervous system finally realized that your love was being used as a leash. They did not simply want your love, they wanted your access. And access is the true currency in these structures. Because when someone can reach you at will, when they can summon you through a message, a crisis, a complaint, a mood they possess, a lever, that lever is not only practical, It is psychological. It confirms dominance. It confirms that your time, attention, and nervous system still belong to the contract. This is why your unreachability feels like rebellion. It is. Now we sharpen the core mechanism of power, attention as tribute. In primitive kingdoms, the ruler demanded tribute, grain, gold, lavor. In modern emotional kingdoms, tribute is attention, responsiveness, care, availability, and explanation. The empath pays tribute constantly, sometimes with visible acts helping, solving, showing up, but more often with invisible acts thinking about others all day, anticipating reactions, pre-editing speech, preventing conflict, monitoring moods, managing guilt. The ruler in these dynamics is not always a person. Often it is a structure, family hierarchy, workplace culture, marriage patterns, social expectations, but the role distribution is clear. One side is allowed to take, the other is trained to give, and as long as you pay tribute, you remain good. Here is the pattern. Stated with merciless clarity, the reachable empath becomes the nervous system of the group. The group does not regulate itself, it regulates through you. You become the emotional organ. You detect danger first. You soothe first. You apologize first. You compromise first. You fix first. You absorb first. This is why you are tired in ways sleep cannot heal. Because you were never resting. Your nervous system was working as infrastructure. Now, midlife intensifies this because the complex begins to produce symptoms that are no longer tolerable. The older you get, the more expensive false peace becomes. The second half of life is ruthless. It will not let you continue a lie without payment. And the lie is simple, that your reachability is kindness. It is not kindness when it is coerced. It is servitude. Now let us bring in a crucial psychological reversal. Empathy was not your virtue, it was your bargaining chip. Do you feel the sting of that sentence? You should. Because your persona, your identity has been built on believing empathy makes you noble. And it can, but in your case, empathy was also functional. It was how you avoided punishment. It was how you stayed safe. It was how you earned belonging. This is the pivot Jung demands. You must see the shadow inside your goodness. Not because you are bad, but because your goodness is not pure freedom, it is partly fear. Here is the mechanism. Your compassion became a shield against conflict. And conflict, in your nervous system, was never just disagreement, it was danger. Because conflict in childhood likely meant withdrawal of love, rage, guilt, shame, abandonment, humiliation, the cold stare, the slammed door, the silent punishment. So the adult you does not avoid drama. You avoid annihilation. That is why you over-explain. That is why you keep giving. That is why you keep smoothing. Your nervous system learned reachability prevents catastrophe. But now the catastrophe is inside you. Somatic collapse is the internal catastrophe. The empath tries to outlove until the body refuses. Now we go deeper into projective identification again because it explains the strange trance you have lived in. Have you noticed how in certain relationships you become a different person? You become smaller, apologetic, pleading, confused. You speak too much. You justify basic needs. You feel wrong simply for existing. That shift is not your lack of boundaries. It is the activation of a complex under pressure. Projective identification often works through three steps. First, the other person disowns an inner state: shame, fear, dependency, rage, emptiness. Second, they provoke you through signals that awaken your old role: accusation, disappointment, victimhood, superiority, chaos. Third, you take on the disowned state and you begin regulating it for them. So they feel lighter, you feel heavier, they feel right, you feel wrong, they feel calm, you feel anxious, they feel powerful, you feel desperate. That is the transaction. And the most important part, it feels like love, because you were trained that carrying weight equals connection. This is why empath bonds can resemble addiction. Not romance addiction, role addiction. When you are needed, you feel alive. When you are not needed, you feel useless. So you keep returning to the pattern even when it destroys you. Now watch the reversal. When you become unreachable, the projection loses its landing site. The projector panics. The structure reacts. Because now the shame, emptiness, and guilt they were exporting returns to them. And what does a psyche do when disowned material returns? It fights, it blames, it rewrites history, it creates a villain. This is where you become the villain. In families, the good child who becomes unreachable becomes selfish, ungrateful, brainwashed, cold, too sensitive, arrogant. The family does not simply criticize, it reassigns identity. Why? Because it must preserve the system's innocence. In marriages, the caretaker who becomes unreachable becomes emotionally unavailable, punishing, distant, narcissistic, dramatic. The partner may not be consciously malicious, but the structure is. It needs you to remain the container. In workplaces, the overfunctioner who becomes unreachable becomes inconsistent, not committed, not aligned, difficult. They will say your standards dropped, when in truth, your unpaid labor stopped. Now this is the family immune response: backlash. Backlash is not merely anger. It is the system trying to restore equilibrium. When you change your role, the system experiences anxiety. It tries to pull you back. It uses guilt, shame, accusation, love bombing, crisis creation, silent treatment, triangulation. It may recruit other members to pressure you. Suddenly relatives call. Suddenly everyone has concerns. Suddenly you are being analyzed. That is not care. That is governance. Here is the mechanism: triangulation as social control. The empath, because of the loyalty complex, cannot tolerate being misinterpreted by the group. You want to explain, you want to clarify, you want to restore peace. This is why the group narrative is such a powerful weapon. You will sacrifice truth to avoid being the bad one. But your nervous system is beginning to refuse this sacrifice. Unreachability is the body refusing social control. Now, Let us integrate father wound and mother wound again, because they are at the center of why group narrative hurts you so deeply. If your mother wound taught you to be responsible for others' emotions, then being accused of selfishness triggers primal terror. It threatens your belonging. If your father wound taught you to earn love through performance, then being criticized triggers primal shame. It threatens your worth. So backlash hits the deepest places, and the structure knows it often unconsciously. This is why they do not simply ask for what they want, they attack your character, because character attack activates the complex, and the complex returns you to servitude. Now we must speak of the empath's private poison, resentment. Resentment is the soul's rage at being used, combined with the persona's refusal to admit rage. Resentment appears as fatigue, sarcasm, withdrawal, numbness, passive aggression, fantasy of escape, secret contempt, loss of libido, depression, brain fog. And here is the tragedy. Resentment is often used by the structure as proof that you are the problem. They say, "You're changing, you're negative, you're not the same, you're not grateful to how fars me." But resentment is not evidence of moral failure. It is evidence that your giving was not free, it was coerced. Now you requested behavior-anchored explanation, not floating philosophy. So let us examine the empath midlife trajectory with exact real-life scenes. Scene 1, the family caretaker. You are the one who answers first. You are the one who sends money. You are the one who visits. You are the one who listens to hours of complaining. You are the one who mediates fights. You are the one who keeps tradition alive. And whenever you hesitate, someone reminds you of your duty. They say, "After all we've done," they say, "family is all you have." So they say, "You're the only one we can count on." They say, "You're so strong," and they say, "You have such a good heart." Oh, these are not compliments. They are shackles wrapped in velvet. Then midlife comes. You begin to see your siblings live freely because you carry the burden. Your parent leans on you because you never push back. Your family uses you as emotional infrastructure, not as a person. And suddenly your body shuts down. You cannot answer. You feel dread. You become unreachable. The family panics. They call you selfish. They start gossip. They rewrite your past sacrifices as your choice. They say, "We never asked you to do that." This is the ultimate insult. It erases your life. Here is the mechanism: sacrifice erasure. Sacrifice erasure is how the structure avoids guilt. If they admit your sacrifice, they owe you, so they rewrite it as your personality. That's just you. Then they can take without shame. Scene 2, the empath spouse. You are married to someone who says they love you, but they do not meet you. They demand access and devotion but provide little accountability. They may not be overtly abusive. They may simply be emotionally immature. They make everything about their mood, their stress, their fatigue, their sensitivity, their trauma, their needs. When you express pain, they say you're attacking them. When you set a boundary, they say you're controlling. When you withdraw, They say you're cruel. You become reachable through guilt. Then midlife arrives, and something in you says, I will not die inside a marriage. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, with cold clarity. You stop explaining, you stop chasing, you stop performing the happy persona. You become unreachable. They escalate, they create crises, they accuse, they threaten abandonment, or they collapse into victimhood. They may suddenly become affectionate, they may suddenly promise change, but it is not transformation, it is the structure trying to restore access. Scene 3, the empath employee. You are the reliable one. Everyone depends on you. Your boss praises you but pays you the same. Colleagues lean on you. You solve problems quietly. You stay late. You fix chaos created by others. You do it because your identity is competence and you fear being seen as lazy or selfish. Then you hit midlife. You see time differently. You see exploitation. Your body starts refusing. You cannot do extra. You cannot smile. You become unreachable. They accuse you of changing. They say you've lost passion. They talk about your attitude. They may even imply you are unwell. But you are not unwell. You are waking up. Now this is the crucial micro turn. Recognition. Consequence inversion. Recognition. Your reachability was the access point through which power controlled you. Consequence. Remaining reachable ensured repeated projection, resentment, and body collapse. It ensured attraction to dynamics where you are valued only as function. Inversion, becoming unreachable, is the psyche removing the access point. It is not punishment, it is liberation from coerced participation. Now we must speak of the mirror. Your first symbol was fire, then contract, then locked door, then labyrinth. Now mirror enters with precision. The mirror is projection itself. In these dynamics, you became a mirror, not a person, a reflective surface where others could see what they needed. Goodness, validation, forgiveness, understanding. They looked into you as if you were a mirror of their virtue. They felt better about themselves. When you become unreachable, the mirror cracks, and then they must look at themselves, but they cannot, so they blame the mirror. This is why you are attacked. The mirror is punished for breaking. Now I will bring in the dream vignette, only one, and it must be decoded. Imagine you dream this. You are walking through a large old house at night. The corridors are endless. Doors line both sides. You hear voices behind the doors calling your name. Some are crying, some are angry, some are pleading. You try to open doors, but each time you touch a handle, it burns your skin. You keep moving, panicked, because you think you must help. Then you reach a door at the end of the corridor. This door is different. It is heavy. It has a lock you have never seen. You place your hand on it and feel nothing, no burn, no pain. You open it, and there is a small, quiet room with a single candle. As you step inside, the voices fade. You lock the door from the inside. You wake up crying not from sadness, but from relief. Jung would say, this house is your psyche. The endless corridors are your inherited roles. The voices behind doors are complex as parts of others that have lived inside you, demanding rescue. The burning handles are the somatic truth that touching those roles costs your life force. And the final door, the door that does not burn you, is individuation. It is the part of you that no longer negotiates your right to exist. The candle is the newly protected life energy that cannot be shared until it is stabilized. This dream is not a story. It is a diagnosis. Your nervous system choosing survival is the psyche guiding you to the last door. Now here is the deepest reversal you have demanded. Emotional loyalty as a power mechanism. Loyalty is often treated as sacred, but in many systems, loyalty is simply the name given to obedience, so it feels virtuous. And this is why unreachability becomes the line between the first half of life and the second. First half, you trade yourself for belonging. Second half, you trade belonging for yourself, not because you do not love, but because you refuse the debt economy. Debt economy is the belief that love must be repaid with excess. This is the psychological structure. After everything I've done, you owe me. Is mole, but love is not a loan. If it is a loan, it is not love, it is investment. And you were the investment. You were groomed to repay forever. Your unreachability is you defaulting on a loan that should never have existed. Now notice how your guilt spikes when you think of disappointing them. That guilt is the final chain. The structure uses guilt like a key. Locked door guilt tries to unlock it. Threshold guilt tries to drag you back over it. Labyrinth guilt tries to lead you to keep walking. Contract guilt tries to renew your signature. Mirror guilt tries to glue it back together so they can keep using you. And yet the nervous system says no. This is the battle, not between you and them, but between your persona and your soul. The persona says, be good, be kind, be reachable. The soul says, be real, be whole, be free. In the next movement, we bring it to its most terrifying and liberating conclusion. What happens when you stop feeding projection? How the system collapses into self-exposure. Why your silence becomes a force of psychological inversion. And how the shadow integrated, not acted out, turns the entire power structure without you doing anything. Because the most powerful transformation is not a move, it is a withdrawal, a refusal to participate, a locked door that remains locked, and that is what terrifies them. Because without your reachability, they must face the night sea alone. The night sea is not merely a poetic image. It is the psychic reality that appears when the empath stops functioning as everyone else's shoreline. For years, you were the shore, you were the stable edge where other people could throw their chaos and feel held. They could crash against you, drain into you, and return to themselves without ever meeting the depth of their own ocean. And you mistook this for intimacy. You mistook it for loyalty. You mistook it for being chosen. But now you have stepped back from the waterline, and what they are facing, what they have been avoiding for decades, is the night sea of their own inner life. Shame, helplessness, dependency, envy, grief, emptiness, guilt, raga. The disowned parts return like a tide. They feel exposed, they feel raw, they feel powerless. So they do the only thing they know. They try to pull you back into the role. That is the final coercion structure, restoration pressure. Restoration pressure is the collective force spoken and unspoken, that demands the old order be reinstated. It is not a single accusation. It is a climate. It arrives as sudden emergencies. Morale lectures, family meetings, passive-aggressive remarks, concerned interventions, spiritual shaming, dramatic vulnerability, and the classic sentence, "This isn't you," end quote. This isn't you is a spell. It is the structure declaring ownership of your identity. Because the structure does not relate to you as a person. It relates to you as a stabilized function, and your unreachability is the destabilization event. Here is the mechanism. Identity enforcement through shame. The system has a map of who you are allowed to be. It enforces that map with emotion. When you exceed the boundaries of the map, when you become unreachable, shame is released like a guard dog. You feel it immediately, a sinking in the stomach, a tightening in the throat, a clouding of certainty, a childish urge to confess, explain, reassure, and restore. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. Now we return to Jung's mechanics, not as academic concepts, but as levers of power, persona, repression, complex, shadow. The persona is the acceptable face of you that was rewarded. The persona of the empath is often the good one, the responsible one, the calm one, the forgiving one, the high road one, the healer one. This persona gives you social safety, but it also makes you predictable. Predictability is the enemy of freedom, because if the structure can predict you, it can control you, and the structure predicts you through your goodness. Repression is the way you maintain the persona. You repressed anger, you repressed refusal, you repressed the impulse to disappoint, you repressed the truth that some relationships were parasitic. You repressed the fact that your love was being taken as tribute. Repression does not erase energy, it stores it in the body. Complex is the inner commander that keeps the system running, the loyalty complex, the shame complex, the savior complex, the father approval complex, the mother rescue complex. Each complex is a small monarchy inside you, claiming it is morality while it governs through fear. Shadow is what returns when the old governance collapses. And here we must be ruthless about the empath's shadow, because most empaths misunderstand it. The empath's shadow is not evil topos. It is the capacity to let people misunderstand you. It is the capacity to let others suffer the consequences of their own immaturity. It is the capacity to be accused without self-defending. It is the capacity to disappoint without repairing. It is the capacity to stop being accessible. It is the capacity to close the locked door and not explain why. Your unreachability is not the shadow taking over, it is the shadow being restored to consciousness, so that your kindness is no longer compulsory. This is the turning point. This is the psychological inversion you demanded when shadow integrates. The entire game changes without you fighting. Because the game depended on one thing, your participation. Not your love, not your morality, your participation in the projection economy. You were a participant in a shadow exchange where you carried what others refused to hold, and you called it love. Now, the transformation is not self-help, it is not a list of actions, it is not coaching, it is a collapse of a false economy, It is the closing of the debt economy. Debt economy is a precise phrase. It means I gave you something, therefore I own your access. It means I suffered for you, therefore you must repay with availability. It means I tolerate you, therefore you must tolerate my entitlement. It means we are family, therefore your boundaries are betrayal. Les joked. This economy does not end through argument, it ends through non-participation. This is where your nervous system becomes the hero, not your mind. Because your mind will try to negotiate, your mind will try to be fair, your mind will try to prove, your mind will try to find a perfect sentence that makes them understand. But they do not want understanding, they want restoration. Your nervous system chooses survival and refuses restoration. This refusal is a sacred violence. Sacred because it restores soul, violent because it ruptures the old order. Now understand what happens next. Because it is predictable, the structure will expose itself. This is one of the deepest retention locks in real life. If you stop feeding projection, the projector reveals itself. When you do not respond to guilt, the guilt becomes sharper. When you do not respond to accusation, the accusation becomes absurd. When you do not respond to silent treatment, the silence becomes desperation. When you do not respond to crisis bait, the crisis turns theatrical. When you do not re-enter the labyrinth becomes visible as a trap. This is what terrifies people. Your unreachability turns invisible strategies into visible behavior. It makes manipulation obvious, and this is why you may see a sudden intensification. Rage, smear campaigns, sudden concerns, moral attacks, triangulation. It is not because you did something wrong. It is because the structure is losing the ability to govern you invisibly. So it tries to govern you loudly. Now here's the most dangerous moment for the empath, the temptation to do it right. I know by do it right, I mean to exit in a way that makes everyone comfortable, to set boundaries in a way that no one can criticize, to withdraw in a way that no one can misinterpret, to become unreachable while still appearing virtuous. But this is the last trap of the persona, because the persona wants to remain loved by the very structure it is leaving. You cannot end servitude while demanding approval from the master. This is where Jung would demand true inner honesty. You must become willing to be the villain in someone else's story. This is not cynicism, it is liberation. Because in many structures, you were good only because you were controllable. The moment you become ungovernable, you become bad. This is not your moral collapse, it is their power loss. Now we return to the mirror symbol again, because it completes the transformation. In the first half of your life, you were a mirror that reflected goodness back to others. They used you to stabilize their self-image. They felt kind because you forgave. They felt powerful because you apologized. They felt innocent because you carried guilt. They felt mature because you stayed calm. They felt desirable because you stayed loyal. They felt important because you were always reachable. But a mirror is not a self. A mirror has no life of its own, and you are no longer willing to live as reflective surface. So the mirror cracks. Now the projection cannot land. And the final stage begins, integration. Integration is not becoming hard, it is not becoming cruel, it is not imitating the coldness you endured. Integration is wholeness, holding both compassion and refusal, holding both empathy and distance, holding both kindness and sovereignty. The integrated empath does not need to announce boundaries. Their nervous system becomes the boundary. They do not need to punish. Their non-participation becomes the consequence. They do not need revenge. Their absence becomes reality. Now, let us bring in one last symbol that you requested earlier, but we have not yet used fully, the threshold. The threshold is where you stand now. The threshold is not comfort. It is liminal ending. You asked for that phrase, liminal ending. A liminal ending is when the old identity has died, but the new identity is not yet fully formed. You are not who you were. You are not yet who you will become. You feel emptiness, uncertainty, grief, guilt, relief, fear, raga, calm, sometimes in the same hour. This is why so many empaths try to go back, not because they love the old life, but because liminality is unbearable to the persona. The persona prefers suffering, it can predict over freedom, it cannot control. This is why your nervous system is ahead of your mind. It already crossed the threshold. Now, the key Jungian insight. The transformation without coaching is this. The reversal happens when you withdraw energy from projection, not by fighting, not by convincing, not by proving, but by refusing to be the landing site. Projection requires a target. Projective identification requires cooperation. And the empath, through guilt and loyalty, has been cooperating. Your unreachability is the end of cooperation. Now let us tie the father wound and mother wound back into the final liberation. Because midlife is when those wounds can finally be seen as mechanisms rather than identities. The mother wound installed hyper-attunement. I must manage emotion to be safe. How? The father wound installed performance. I must be impressive to be worthy. As these wounds created your persona, but your unreachability is the psyche saying, the child no longer runs the kingdom. The child's strategy worked then, it is killing you now. So the psyche demands a new ruler. Consciousness. Consciousness does not mean intellectual insight. It means the ability to endure discomfort without reverting to the role. It means enduring misinterpretation without self-defense. It means allowing backlash without re-entering the labyrinth. It means letting silence sit without rushing to repair. It means letting someone be disappointed without paying to fix it. That is shadow integration. And when shadow integrates, the power structure flips. Because power cannot control what does not negotiate for approval. The empath was controlled through one channel, the need to remain good in the eyes of others, the need to remain emotionally loyal, the need to avoid shame. When that channel closes, when you become unreachable, not physically unreachable, but psychologically unbuyable, the structure has no lever. Now I will say the reframe as sharply as it deserves to be said. You did not become unreachable because you stopped caring. You became unreachable because you finally cared about reality. You finally cared about the truth that love without reciprocity becomes exploitation. You finally cared about the truth that loyalty without respect becomes servitude. You finally cared about the truth that compassion without boundaries becomes self-harm. And your nervous system, older than language, wiser than persona, chose survival. This is why the second half of life has a strange spiritual brutality. It is not positive, it is not comforting, it is truthful. The psyche stops offering illusions as payment for suffering. It demands authenticity. So you are not finished. You asked for an open ending, not resolved, still transforming, because after you become unreachable, there is grief. You grieve the fantasy that if you loved enough, they would finally see you. You grieve the fantasy that being good guarantees being cherished. You grieve the fantasy that family means safety. You grieve the fantasy that patience can redeem immaturity. You grieve the years you spent in the labyrinth calling it home. And grief is not weakness. It is a sign that something false has died. Then there is fear, because if you are not the caretaker, who are you? If you are not the moral one, what is your identity? If you are not the reachable one, will you be alone? Here Jung would smile, not warmly, but with a kind of stern mercy, because this is the correct question of midlife. You must become someone who can tolerate solitude without collapsing into guilt. You must become someone who can hold love without being owned by it. You must become someone who can say no without needing permission. And you will feel strange at first, because your old nervous system equated this with danger. But now the nervous system is learning a new truth. Your survival is not betrayal. Your survival is integrity. So, the conclusion is not a motivational finale, it is a sober recognition. You became unreachable because the psyche decided the debt economy is closed. No more tribute, no more coerced compassion, no more role slavery dressed as virtue, no more mirror, no more labyrinth. Only the locked door protected, quiet, sacred, and behind that door, your life begins to belong to you, not as a reward, as a fact,